Thanks very much for coming here on this weekday. I appreciate it very much. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Jim Flett Wilson, and I'm a Professor of Human Genetics at the University of Edinburgh. And I've spent the last 20 years of my life studying the genetics and the health of people in Shetland and in Orkney. And I'm here today to report some of our most important findings to you, and also what the plans we have for the future. I'm joined on the stage later by Sandra Lawrenson, who's the chair of a newly formed local committee called Viking Genes Shetland, and you'll be hearing about some of their plans from Sandra after I speak. So that's the format. I'm going to talk to you for about half an hour, and then I'm going to hand over to Sandra. And afterwards, we're going to have a question and answer session so that you can get the answers to any queries that you have. And then tea and coffee are going to be brought in, and I'll be able to circulate around if people have questions that they might want to ask privately rather than in front of everybody else. Please note that this is being filmed, so we're not going to take questions and answers during the talks so we don't interrupt the flow. We'll do all of that at the end, and that part won't be filmed. We also have an ITV camera crew here who might be taking some general shots at the back and other such things. And also my colleague Lisa Thomas is here from the University of Edinburgh, and she'll be taking some snaps for social media in Edinburgh. If you don't want to be in these snaps, please report to Lisa, put your hand up, and make it clear to her. But I'm sure it'll all be fine. So yeah, that's the introduction. Thank you. So I've entitled my talk, Viking Genes, Improving Health in Shetland. And I'm going to start by really just giving you a flavour of what we've been doing for the last 20 years, really the greatest hits of the Viking Genes research, focusing on the impact I think we can have on the health of Shetlanders, but also people in Orkney and in the Western Isles. And then working up towards describing to you the benefit of screening at-risk communities such as this community. And I'm going to close with a proposal for a world-leading community genetic screen that I feel we should be doing here in Shetland. So, the Viking Genes studies. This is my life's work, really. I started in 2003 in a study called Orchids in Orkney, where I grew up. And we recruited 2,000 people. You can see the yellow dots for people with Orkney grandparents. And then we moved on to the Viking Health Study Shetland in 2013 and recruited another 2,000 Shetlanders. And you can see them with the orange-coloured dots here. And we then moved on to a study more recently in time of the Hebrides. So the blue dots are people with Hebridean ancestry. And so altogether, we recruited 10,000 individuals. And these actually included the diasporas, so the people who come from Shetland, Orkney, and the Hebrides, or their parents come from here, but who live elsewhere, particularly in the cities of the Scottish mainland. You can see in this map here how there's concentrations in Aberdeen and in Edinburgh, particularly of people from Orkney and Shetland, but there's a concentration in Glasgow on the west here, particularly of people with Hebridean parents. And in Inverness, you've got a mixture of both. But this diaspora, of course, is found much further afield than Edinburgh. We have people in England. I would count as one of them. I live in England, but all over the world, particularly in Australia and in New Zealand for Shetlanders, and in Canada for many people. And there's a big concentration of Orcadian farmers there on the prairie of Canada. But it's actually a worldwide study because we find the genes of Shetlanders and Orcadians and Hebrideans all around the world. So, as I said, we've recruited 10,000 people altogether now. Each of these is an adult volunteer, and the criterion was to have at least 2 grandparents born on the island. So 2, 3, or 4 grandparents. And what did we find? The first and most important thing we found was that the islanders of Scotland have distinct gene pools. We are not the same as the people who live on the mainland. And this is because of the Norse component that's rather famous and which we're very proud of. But I think more so it is because of genetic isolation. The fact that there have been very few immigrants until recently, and that people have tended to marry locally over the last 500 and more years. And what this has led to is a number of risk variants, a number of changes in our DNA that increase the risk of different serious diseases having become a lot more common. We call these founder variants. The most famous one in Shetland is a variant called BRCA2 that increases the risk of breast, ovarian, and prostate cancer. Another one that's rather important in Shetland is in a gene called KCNH2. So these gene names are difficult to remember, but this causes a sometimes fatal heart arrhythmia that is inherited down the generations. And the third thing I want to highlight about our studies is that we're one of only 2 such studies in the UK that have returned these important results to the volunteers. Most studies just sit on this information and do nothing about it. And we thought this was unconscionable, and it was actually the best thing that we could do for our participants would be to return this information. So that's what we did, and we think we have good examples now of how we've saved some lives and we are improving health. So we're working towards implementing what we call genomic medicine. So this is using DNA and genetic information in clinical decision-making, in medicine. And while that is starting to happen across the board, I don't think it's happening at anything like the pace at which it could happen. And we'd like to push that forward. And it's actually an aspect of what's often talked about, this idea of preventative medicine, of changing the mindset of medicine from being reactive, that is, you wait till somebody's broken and then you try to fix them, to being proactive and preventative and trying to find out what they're likely to get before they have it and to diagnose them early when it's much, much easier to sort of stave off further serious disease. We all know that prevention is better than cure. So, distinct gene pools, I said. I'm going to talk you through each of these points quickly in turn. This graph is one of a small number of graphs I'm going to show you. It's quite easy to understand. It represents 40,000 white people from the UK and Ireland, and each cross or little plus is one human being. It's a representation of their genes. And how close together these crosses and dots are shows how much DNA they share. It shows how closely related they are. So if 2 brothers were in it, they'd be right next to each other. And what we see is that all of 30 different populations, from Kent to Cornwall, from Galway to Caithness, they're all in one big blob here that I've called British and Irish. The Welsh are trying to separate out, but there's 4 populations in the UK that stand completely apart from all the others. 2 Jewish populations, the Shetland population, and the Orkney population. So this is what I mean when we say we have a distinct gene pool. This is driven by many thousands of tiny little subtle changes that mean we're slightly different. And this is because of the lack of immigration, as I said. And we call these populations founder populations. And this is because when we look into the family trees of people from Shetland, many, many people will descend from the same ancestors 250 years ago. There could be a couple born in 1750, and if you look down the family trees, they'll have hundreds of descendants in Shetland today. And that's normal enough. But if one of these people had a mutation, had a change in their DNA that causes cancer, it means that unfortunately hundreds of people today might have inherited that change from these people. As long as these common ancestors did not have these mutations, it doesn't matter. It's interesting to me as a geneticist, but it has no meaning for the world. But as soon as one of them does have one of these mutations, it's a different story, and it becomes very, very important. And that's how these things become so common. This process happens everywhere on Earth, but people move around more, and people might live anywhere from Yorkshire to Cornwall, whereas here there's more of a concentration. There's a core local population who descend from these founder individuals. And that's why we call it a founder population. And indeed, that's why we call them founder variants. And they're only important if they cause disease, and these are the ones that we have been focusing on. And they relate not just to cancer and to heart arrhythmias. There are many life-threatening conditions where we found variants in Shetland that we think are important. They relate to heart failure, to metabolic diseases such as Wilson disease, hemochromatosis, and also, unfortunately, to a number of fatal childhood conditions. So this is not just about cancer. This is a broader importance than that. Now, I'm just going to take you through a couple of these in a table here. So I've highlighted in bold the ones that are important in Shetland, but this is a table of 10 of these variants that are more than 50 times more common in Shetland or Orkney than they are elsewhere in the UK. At the top is the BRCA1 variant, a variant we found in Orkney, which increases the risk of breast and ovarian cancer. But the second one is the famous BRCA2 variant, increasing the risk of breast, ovarian, and prostate cancer. That's 140 times higher in Shetland than it is elsewhere. Then we have two variants in the ATP7B gene that cause Wilson disease. One of them is nearly 200 times higher in Shetland. The other is more than 300 times higher in Shetland. So these are not small differences. This is not 1%. This is a huge, huge difference. We have two of these variants in the TTN gene that cause a disease called dilated cardiomyopathy that, if untreated, can lead to heart failure. And these are astonishing. One is 700 times more common in Shetland, and one of them is over 3,000 times more common. Really, really huge differences. And the last one is the KCNH2 variant that I've already mentioned, causing long QT syndrome, an inherited abnormality of the heartbeat that can lead to fatal cardiac arrest. So this might be, somewhat shocking to see, but I actually see it as an opportunity. This is not a very large number of variants here. It's actually quite cheap and easy to test for these. And I was looking at this table when I first saw it thinking, this is a chance. We can do something about this. The science is here. And that's what I really think we should do. And that's what I'm here today to try to persuade you of. The other thing that I think is important is some of these variants have been very famously associated with certain places, but this risk is found across all of Shetland. I've yet to see part of Shetland that doesn't carry some of these risks. I'll show you a few maps now to illustrate what I mean. So the most famous one of all is this BRCA2 variant, which originated in Walsa, I think probably 300 years ago. But it's important to note that not every family carrying this variant has Walsa ancestors. We have a small number of families who do not link to Walsa. I suppose deep in the past they must do, but it's not only linked to Walsa people, even if it's much more common there. Now, this is the KCNH2 variant that causes the heart arrhythmia. Now, it was discovered in a large series of families that originate from East Burrafirth by the NHS a number of years ago, and we found many more people in these families, but we've also found that another large series of families from Unst who are unrelated to the Aid families who also carry this variant. So we're seeing it in more places across the islands than was known. I talked about Wilson disease briefly, so we have a very high concentration in Burra Isle of one of these variants that can cause Wilson disease, and the other one is more diffuse across Delton, Lunnasting, and other parts of Shetland, as you can see here. And then we talked also about the cardiomyopathy, the disease of the heart, and one of the two variants here is very, very tightly linked to Yell. I think nearly every one of our carriers we could link back to a couple who were born in Yell in 1750. And it's an exact illustration of this founder effect. That mutation happened in that couple, and it's come all the way down the 7 generations from then until now. So each of these variants that we're talking about here, I call an actionable variant. And we call them that because we can take action. We can do something about it. Each of them is a harmful genetic variant linked to a serious genetic disease, but critically, they can be prevented or at least ameliorated by NHS treatment. They are actionable. But you can only take action if you're aware of the risk. There's lots of people walking out on the streets who have no idea that they're carrying one of these variants, so they cannot take action. If you know, you can have the early intervention that then staves off the disease. It's also very cost effective. It's cost effective because genetic screening is relatively cheap and because it saves all the treatment costs and the end-of-life care that would happen if the people had not been found. So Viking Genes has pioneered this return of actionable findings starting a couple of years ago. And we started with the ORCID study and the Viking 1 study. We looked at 4,200 people, and we had 64 people who had actionable variants requiring letters to be sent to them, making them aware of this. So that was the initial impact, but this impact then multiplied because many of these people, of course, have first-degree relatives. They have brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, daughters, and sons. And the NHS then went out by cascade, as they call it, leapfrogging out to the different relatives to see that they need to be screened as well. And I don't have the full figures for this yet, but 5 initial BRCA2 letters that we sent to people led to 55 other people being invited to be tested. So there's a huge multiplier effect here on the benefit that this can have in the community. At least 2 of these detected cancers that they didn't know about, and they have had various forms of potentially life-saving surgery. And there's been other consequences that we know about, various kinds of heart screening, blood iron tests, changes to medication, and so on and so forth. Then, in our more recent study, Viking 2 and Viking 3 had 5,600 people in it, and we sent 94 letters so far. We're not quite finished. There's about 50 letters that we still haven't managed to get agreement from the NHS to go, but only 10 of these are to residents in Shetland. So we're very, very nearly finished in Shetland. And I'll admit freely that the return of results did take some time. We were the second people in the whole of the UK to do this, the first in Scotland. So we're having to push doors open that hadn't been opened before and work out new protocols. But when we come to do a screening project, it will be much, much faster because all of that groundwork will be done. Everything will be pre-agreed and we'll be able to run a much smoother sort of workflow and protocol. So I'm going to just take you through a couple of case studies to illustrate the power of this. After the BRCA2 announcement last year, we found that 70% of the carriers had grandparents from Walsa. Remember I said not everyone had Walsa relations, but this was very clearly a concentration. We can see it going back in Walsa families beyond 1750, actually beyond records. It must have happened prior to the genealogical records we have. And it means that in Walsa, 1 in 43 Walsa people with all 4 Walsa grandparents are carriers of this variant, one of the highest frequencies in the world. Unfortunately, no screening is available despite this without a family history of cancer, neither in Walsa nor in the Shetland mainland, nor for Shetlanders across Scotland. And I don't think that's right. And it's obviously because of money, but I think we can maybe change that. Christine went public with her story. She said, after my letter, we found an undetected cancer. She was given surgery on the NHS and now has the all clear. But what I think is important here, 4 of her 6 close relatives were shown to be carriers. 2 of them were already dead, but because their children had tested positive, we could infer that they had the variant. So altogether, 3 generations were positively impacted by the return of actionable results to 1 woman. So you see how this can multiply up across the community. This year, we found some other cases here. John Arthur's in the audience today, and this BRCA2 variant, the same variant, can cause prostate cancer. After receiving his letter from me, John Arthur went to get checked, and after scans and a biopsy was diagnosed with prostate cancer. So John Arthur elected to have a robotic prostatectomy and has since also been given the all clear. John Arthur says, it's all thanks to your study that this has been done as fast as it has. I would probably never have gone to the doctor about it until it was too late for anything to be done. And I think that's really important as well. Men aren't very good at going to the doctor, are they? So this kind of testing can raise awareness, can get people to be thinking about the health risks that they personally have, and they might look after themselves a bit more, or perhaps go for screening, or indeed be put to screening according to a sort of care pathway. Now, a different disease now I've mentioned a couple of times cardiomyopathy. So Jacqueline received a letter telling her she was a carrier of a variant in the titin gene, the TTN gene that increases the risk of this disease, dilated cardiomyopathy. So this is a disease of the heart muscle. So the main pumping chamber of the heart becomes enlarged and it loses its ability to contract as well as it ought to be able to do. And if untreated, this can eventually lead to heart failure. So Jacqueline had an echo scan on her heart, which shows she does actually have the condition, and she was given new medication, which has actually kept it in check and made it considerably better, I believe, and she'll now get regular monitoring going forward. Jacqueline says, I strongly believe that without the genetic screening provided by Viking Genes, my risk factor and condition would not have been detected until it was too late, as I had no suspicious symptoms. And this is again a theme. People don't know that they're ill. They don't know that they're becoming ill. Whereas if they had genetic screening, they would be able to look out for this, maybe be able to be tested more regularly. And there are many more volunteer stories, some of them on our website, related to long QT syndrome or Wilson disease. And when I look at this, I just think, how many more are out there? How many more people are walking along out there with a time bomb ticking in their DNA? We also published a paper last year looking at a different kind of variant. So this is a type of variant that doesn't influence your own health, but it influences the health potentially of your children. And the most famous disease of this kind is cystic fibrosis. So I'm actually a carrier of a variant that causes cystic fibrosis, but I'm completely healthy, so far anyway. But if I were to have children with someone who also was a carrier of the cystic fibrosis variant, we would be at quite a high risk of bringing a cystic fibrosis baby into the world. So I call these carrier variants. They don't cause you harm, but they greatly increase the risk of you bearing children who are ill. And we have common diseases like cystic fibrosis of this type in Scotland, but what we discovered was that Shetland had its own suite of these rare, recessive is the genetic word for it, carrier conditions, most obviously Batten disease. Now, Batten disease is a fatal degenerative disease of children, and unfortunately, 1 in 41 Shetlanders is a carrier of this variant. This is a shockingly high frequency, and it means that any random Shetland fella who gets together with a random Shetland girl has a really quite high, non-trivial chance of having a baby with Batten disease. And there are a number of other such diseases that we found like this in Shetland, Cohen syndrome, certain kinds of myotonia. But these diseases can also benefit from screening, perhaps screening of a slightly different set of people, younger people, people who are thinking about having a family. They could find out if they were carriers and make reproductive decisions on that basis, particularly if couples decided to get screened. And this is already done in the UK in the Jewish community through a program called Genetics. So our aim of the screening I'm going to propose to you is to return the actionable variants in the first phase. But I think over the lifetime of the screening project, we should think to return these carrier variants as well. But we need to agree a pathway of care with the NHS first. The only one that has been returned so far in the UK is the cystic fibrosis variant. So we'll start with that one. Now, the Batten disease variant I just mentioned in the PPT1 gene is actually a little bit different from the maps I've shown you so far. Look at this. It's very, very widespread, from Was to Descaries, to Denness to Yell, and most of the parishes in between. I've traced it back. We have many, many carriers in our data, back to 12 different parishes where it arose. But of course, these people live all over Shetland today. And this is what I mean when I say that every parish is affected. There might be different things in the different parishes, but every parish and isle is affected. So I think there's a need. We've seen there's a need. There's a much higher health risk than in the general UK population. But because it's very concentrated down into a really small number of genes and variants, not the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of variants that you might need to screen in Edinburgh, I think there's also an opportunity. There's an opportunity to do this in a cost-effective way. And it's really, really valuable because half the people don't know that they're carrying one of these variants. So I think it could be transformational for the health of the community, and it could impact the future health of islanders as well because of these carrier variants. And of course, it will save the NHS money in the long term because we're saving the future costs of treating these people. And it would put the healthcare provision, the genomic part of it, on par with the best in the world. Now, this is not a fantasy. This is actually already happening in the UK for the Jewish community in London. So NHS England, only, not NHS Scotland, run a programme called the Jewish BRCA programme, or J-BRCA for short. And this is a revolutionary programme because it does not require a family history of cancer. This is a cancer testing programme looking at 3 of these BRCA variants that the Jewish people have that have become much more common, just as the variant has in Walsa. To be eligible for J-BRCA, you just need to have 1 or more Jewish grandparents. This is a community-based screening programme that does not require a family history or a personal history of cancer. And this is what I think we need in Shetland. Research in this programme has showed that 5 in 10 BRCA carriers are missed if family history is required, family disease history is required for testing. And this matches exactly our own figures here in Shetland and in Orkney. So when we looked at the BRCA1 in Orkney and the BRCA2 in Shetland, the NHS didn't know about half of the families that we found. And when we look at the blood disease hemochromatosis in the Western Isles, in a small sample, again, 50% of the people had no idea that they had this disease. Indeed, they'd never heard of the disease. A lot of work has been done on the Jewish BRCA programme, doing health economics and showing that BRCA screening saves the NHS costs. And the greatest savings actually come from screening the highest risk groups. So we can look at the figures here. The BRCA risk in the general Scottish population is about 1 in 240 people. In the Ashkenazi Jewish population, it's 1 in 41 people. In Walsa, it's 1 in 43 people. Pretty much exactly the same as in the Jewish population. So these arguments carry over seamlessly into our population. And also, as I briefly mentioned, a separate program in the Jewish population called Genetics also screens for 47 Jewish carrier conditions. So it's not Batten disease. These are different conditions, Usher syndrome, Tay-Sachs disease, and so on, that have become common in the Jewish population because they also descend from a small number of founders hundreds of years ago, and some of them had mutations that have passed down today to many Jewish people. So I wondered what the Scottish Government had to say about these things, and they published a genomic medicine strategy last year for 5 years, and it has quite a good executive summary. Our vision is to establish an equitable, person-centred genomic medicine service, which I wholeheartedly agree with. And obviously, Scotland's high-risk groups need an equitable provision of genomic medicine to safeguard their communities, but the trouble is it's just not being provided at present. There are 6,000 Scottish Jews live around Glasgow, and they're unable to access the J-BRCA programme, the NHS England programme. The Shetlandic, the Orcadian and Hebridean island populations have similar high risks, not just of cancer, but of other diseases. And there's the diaspora of islanders living all over the UK. Remember the maps I showed you at the beginning. None of these people are getting equitable provision of medicine. So I think there's a clear need. I think there is a previously demonstrated NHS cost effectiveness, but no funding has been forthcoming. So that's why we're here today to launch fundraising for the proposed Shetland Community Screening Project. I would like to screen Shetlanders with a bespoke, low-cost panel of variants, 40 or 50 variants that we would choose to suit the population. We would first return the actionable variants, and later on the carrier variants. We would focus on Shetland variants, such as the BRCA2, Walsa variant, but also Scottish variants, such as the hemochromatosis variants and the cystic fibrosis variants, because they are also found in Shetland, and not everyone who lives in Shetland has Shetland ancestors. In this way, we'd offer Shetlanders world-class preventative genomic health provision, on par with the Jewish communities around the world and US healthcare providers. And we'd also raise awareness of the genetic inheritance that we all share with the public, and equally importantly with healthcare providers who are not always up on these sorts of things. And we could then turn this, into something where we could test other things that are coming down the pike. There's a new form of genetic testing called polygenic risk scoring. And I was a little bit suspicious of this for a number of years, but a paper very recently showed that this is really working now for prostate cancer, a disease where we really, really would need improvements in our ability to surveil people to see who is at risk. I think we have strong community support, so that's why we're launching fundraising to screen 5,000 adult Shetlanders in this way. And I just want to touch, before I close, on a couple of points. I'm very happy to be in collaboration with a man called Professor Ranjit Manchanda, and he's the founder of the Jewish BRCA program, running mostly out of London. But he's also leading a new project called Protect-C, and this is a 5,000-person clinical trial in Yorkshire, and it's really trialing population screening, this time for breast, ovarian, prostate, bowel, and womb cancer genetic variants. And I'm very excited about this trial, which is actually hoping to launch later this year. Ranjit says this critically important and exciting study can change the paradigm for implementing genetic testing in healthcare for patient and population benefit. This approach can prevent thousands more cancers than any current clinical strategy, saving the lives of many women. And if it's true in Yorkshire, it's true in Shetland. We're lucky that we're going to be able to learn from and emulate Ranjit's methods. So just before I close again, I want to address the situation for existing Viking Genes volunteers. So about 3,000 Shetlanders are already part of Viking Genes, either in Viking 1, the Viking Health Study Shetland, or in Viking 2. And in fact, their actionable variant screen is almost complete. It's totally complete for the Viking Health Study Shetland and very nearly complete for Viking 2. As I said, there's only about 10 letters waiting agreement from the NHS to send, and I hope to get that done in the coming months. But existing volunteers have had the actionable variant screen, but they will need to be reconsented for the proposed future return of carrier variants because they haven't been consented to that yet. And obviously this is an opt-in process. No one has to take part in any of this if they don't want to. But then the existing volunteers will be able to access the online genetic health dashboard in the same way as new volunteers, and both studies will be brought together. So in summary, I hope I've persuaded you that in Shetland we have a distinct gene pool and we have distinct risk factors, not just by a couple of percent, sometimes up to 3,000-fold enriched. I hope I've persuaded you that return of results can save lives. We have examples that I've showed you. Also, carrier variants, not just actionable variants, have become common in Shetland, particularly Batten disease, and this affects every part of Shetland, not just particular islands. I think this is a screening opportunity, and I hope you agree, and that's why we're seeking funding today. Obviously, very many people have been involved in this work over the years, too many to name here, but if you want to learn more about this work, please look at our website. We keep it up to date with all sorts of information. It's viking.ed.ac.uk. But I'm just going to thank all of the volunteers in all of our studies. Without these people's trust, giving us their saliva, their DNA, their blood, their health data, their measurements, we could never do studies like this, and we couldn't help them, and we couldn't help the population at large. So thank you very much to everyone who volunteered, and thanks very much for coming.